A secret that nearly destroyed my family. Families always seem to have secrets, but I never imagined that ours would be so devastating. It all began with an unexpected invitation and a confession that shook the very foundations of our lives. Yesterday afternoon, without any warning, my brother-in-law, the husband of my sister, asked my wife to have lunch with him. He didn't give many details, only mentioning that there was something important he needed to talk to her about. When my wife told me about the invitation, I noticed she was intrigued, but she didn't seem overly worried. "Do you think it might have something to do with my sister?" she asked me, frowning. "Maybe they're going through some problems, and he wants a female perspective on the matter." I also found the situation a bit strange. My brother-in-law had never invited my wife to lunch alone before. Sure, it was common for them to exchange messages, but they were always about trivial matters: the kids' schedules, family gatherings, birthdays, nothing that would raise any suspicions. Our family has always been very close, so I didn't think much of it. "Go and find out," I told her, trying to downplay its importance. She agreed and arranged to meet him at a cafe near his office the next day. The next morning, while she was getting ready to leave, she mentioned the lunch again. "I still don't know what it's about," she said with a slight hint of unease in her voice. "It's probably nothing serious," I assured her. "Just listen to what he has to say, and if it's something we can help with, we'll solve it together." When lunchtime arrived, my wife headed to the cafe. It was a busy place, filled with the typical hubbub of the rush hour. Knowing she was in a public spot reassured her a bit. She arrived early and chose a table by the window from where she could see the entrance. A few minutes later he appeared. He looked uneasy, more nervous than she had ever seen him. After exchanging the usual greetings and talking about trivial things like work and the kids, the food arrived. That's when he took a deep breath and dropped the bomb. He started with a compliment. "You look beautiful today." At first, she thought he was just being kind. But then he continued. "You have always been the light of my life. You make me feel things I've never felt before. It was love at first sight." His voice trembled slightly. "I have loved you since the moment I first saw you. If you were mine, I'd treat you like the queen you are. I'd give you everything you deserve." My wife was frozen. She looked at her brother-in-law, unable to believe what she was hearing. This man, the husband of her best friend, the father of her nieces and nephews, was confessing his love as if he were in a romance movie, not in real life. He didn't stop. He continued talking about how he had been hiding his feelings for years, how he had always watched and admired her from afar, convinced that they were meant to be together. She tried to interrupt him, to tell him he was making a mistake, but he wouldn't let her speak. It was as if he had rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in his head. Up until that moment, my brother-in-law had always had a cordial relationship with my wife. We often saw each other at family gatherings, birthdays, and parties. He was the typical fun uncle, the one who was always present at every barbecue and every Christmas. Yes, he used to send my wife messages, but they were always about routine things, nothing that seemed suspicious or out of place. He also often talked with my mother, with my younger brother. We never imagined something like this was happening. For my wife, hearing all of this felt like a punch to the gut. She wouldn't let him continue. She immediately stood up, pushing the chair back with a screech against the floor. She left the cafe without looking back, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone to call me. As she recounted what had happened, texts from him began to arrive. First, apologies. He said he hadn't thought it through, that it was all just a misunderstanding, that he was sorry for making her feel uncomfortable. But the damage was already done. My wife left work early and came straight home to calmly tell me everything. Her phone kept ringing with incessant calls and messages from my brother-in-law. I told her to answer one of his calls and put him on speaker so I could listen. On the other end of the line, he was sobbing. "Please, don't tell your sister anything," he pleaded over and over. "I made a mistake. I thought there was something between us, that you felt the same." Apparently, when we met at my sister's house last weekend, he believed my wife was flirting with him. Supposedly, there was a moment in the kitchen when he felt a special connection. My wife is a woman with a strong character and a playful personality. Perhaps one could understand how an insecure person might misinterpret her sense of humor as flirting. But this went beyond anything we could have imagined. My brother-in-law asked if I already knew about it. "Yes, I'm here," I replied coldly. He began to beg me as well. He pleaded for me to keep it a secret, to not destroy his marriage, to think of the children. "I swear I have never cheated on your sister," he insisted. "It's only her. Only her." At that moment, I knew I was done listening. "I'm not going to do anything tonight," I told him. "I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up the call and looked at my wife. Now we had this disaster in our hands, and we didn't know what to do. My wife wanted to immediately go to my sister's house and tell her everything, but the idea of breaking up her marriage and shattering the lives of my nieces and nephews churned my stomach. I knew that what was right was to tell the truth, but I also feared the consequences. Even if my sister decided to forgive him and continue with her marriage, we would never be a family like before. Gatherings, parties, Christmas dinners, everything would change forever. I didn't care what happened to him. I didn't care if he lost his marriage, his reputation, or his entire life. But I did care about my sister, my nieces and nephews, and the stability of our family. We didn't know that, while we were debating what to do, my brother-in-law was already acting on his own. My brother-in-law's secret comes to light. Just a few hours after that call, my sister called me. She sounded agitated, as if on the verge of tears, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I need to talk to you," she said urgently. "It's about your wife." At that moment, I felt as though the ground was opening beneath my feet. My sister explained that her husband, my brother-in-law, had come to her in the middle of the night, crying inconsolably. He told her that my wife had tried to seduce him, that she had attempted to start an affair with him. He painted himself as the victim, insisting that my wife had been provoking him for months. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's a lie," I said immediately. "Don't move from there, I'm coming over." I hung up and called my parents. I didn't have time for detailed explanations, so I got straight to the point. My mother was in shock. My father became furious. Both said they would leave immediately for my sister's house to be with her and look after the children. Then I called my younger brother. He woke up with a sleepy voice, but when I explained the situation, he became alert immediately. "I'm coming to your house to stay with your kids," he said without hesitation. I was grateful to have my family by my side. Meanwhile, my wife was already gathering her things, her face pale and tense. I knew that this conversation with my sister was going to be hard, but I also knew she had to face it. The journey to my sister's house felt endless. Neither of us spoke during the drive. There was too much at stake, too many mixed emotions. When we arrived, my sister was already on the porch with her husband. He had his head bowed, his face swollen from crying so much. He knew we had brought evidence. He knew that his lies were about to crumble. We approached without saying a word. My wife, with a firm look and her chin held high, took out her phone and handed it to my sister. She took it with steady hands and began to review the messages. Her expression hardened with every word she read. Then she played the voice messages. Each one was proof of her husband's obsession. My brother-in-law broke down in tears. This man, who faced fires and extreme situations without blinking, was now crumbling, trembling with fear and remorse. My sister remained silent, holding the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Pack your bag and leave," she finally said to her husband in a cold, firm voice. "I don't want to see you here tonight." He tried to speak, to beg, to justify himself. "Enough!" she shouted at him with a harshness I had never heard before. "There's nothing you can say that will fix this." My wife, who had remained strong until that moment, began to cry as my sister approached and embraced her. It was a moment of solidarity between them, a sign that, despite everything, their friendship remained intact. I stared at my brother-in-law. He looked like a defeated man, someone who knew he had destroyed his own life with his own hands. "You have to go," I said to him, showing not a trace of compassion. He nodded slowly and went into the house to pack his things. My sister, meanwhile, stayed by my wife's side, speaking to her in a low voice. They had met in college and had been friends long before becoming sisters-in-law. Now, that friendship was the only thing standing after the disaster her husband had caused. The rest of the night was a whirlwind of conversations and plans. No one slept. My sister was clear that her marriage was over, but there were too many things to decide. Her children, the house, the next legal steps. That was when she made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to check his computer," she said, her face hardened by anger. "I want to know what else he's been hiding." She sat in front of her husband's MacBook and typed in several passwords. On the third attempt, she managed to get in. What she found chilled our blood. In a hidden folder, there were dozens of photos of my wife. They were photos taken at various family events, at gatherings, on vacations. But the most unsettling thing was that they were always images of her alone. Never in a group, never in a casual context. My sister clicked on a specific folder, and there they were. Photos from a trip we had taken together to the beach a few years ago. In those images, my wife was wearing a bikini, something she doesn't usually do. And there they were, over 50 photos of her in a swimsuit, taken without her knowledge. My sister paled upon seeing them. "This is no longer just an infatuation," she whispered. "This is an obsession." My wife covered her mouth with her hand, completely horrified. "Does this warrant a restraining order?" my sister asked in a low voice. For the first time all night, we realized that this wasn't just a case of family betrayal. It had become something much more disturbing. We called a lawyer to understand our options. My sister knew she had to protect herself and her children. The last thing she wanted was for her husband, now ex-husband, to remain near them. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law kept calling and sending messages. But now, they were no longer pleas or apologies. That very night, my wife received an email from him from a new account he had just created. It began with what looked like an apology, but soon it turned into something darker. He said that he never had the chance to finish his confession at the cafe, that there were still things he needed to say. And then, in a torrent of words, he poured out all his obsession. He spoke about how he had loved her in secret, how every time he saw her he felt that she was also sending him signals. He insisted that there was something special between them, a connection that she simply could not deny. It was a long, sick email, detailed to the point of being chilling. And at the end, he directed several lines at me. He said that I did not deserve her, that I did not make her happy, that she was trapped in a boring marriage with a man who didn't know how to appreciate what he had. He called me pathetic. He told me he couldn't understand how a woman like her could be with someone like me. When I finished reading, I was silent. My wife was trembling. We forwarded the email to my sister and her lawyer. This was more than just an emotional infidelity. It was the testimony of an obsessed mind. This should be enough to get him kicked out of the house, the lawyer said when we showed him the evidence. That was the last straw. My sister got in touch with the authorities and began the legal process to obtain a restraining order. The next morning, my brother-in-law was officially forced to leave the house, but the nightmare was far from over. After my sister obtained the order for her husband to leave the house, the atmosphere felt a bit lighter, yet the tension was still dense, like a storm looming on the horizon. We knew that this wasn't over. My wife tried to resume her routine, but she was on edge. She had blocked my brother-in-law's number and all his social media accounts, yet the feeling that he might find another way to contact her kept her constantly alert, and she was right to be worried. That same night, he tried to send her another email from a new account. This time, he didn't bother to apologize. He wrote that she owed him a face-to-face conversation, that she had to hear the whole truth from his mouth without intermediaries. In his twisted mind, he still believed that she owed him something. But the most disturbing part came at the end of the message. "If you don't answer me, I will come and get you. I don't want to do that, but I will if necessary." When my wife read those words, she felt a chill run down her spine. It was no longer just an obsessive confession. This was turning into a veiled threat. She showed me the message and my blood boiled with fury. "This guy is out of his mind," I said, clenching my fists. "We can't let this continue." We called my sister and sent her a screenshot of the message. She was just as alarmed as we were. "I'm going to talk with my lawyer again," she assured us. "He's not going to keep harassing you." The next morning, my sister met with her lawyer and presented the message as evidence. With that, the process for a restraining order against him accelerated. Meanwhile, my wife and I took extra precautions. She changed her route to work, began avoiding places she used to frequent, and stopped posting anything on social media. We didn't want him to have any clue about her movements. For days, we heard nothing from him. There were no more messages or attempts at contact. But the calm was only an illusion. One night, my wife returned from work and told me that she had noticed a car parked near her office that seemed to be there every time she left. It was a dark vehicle, with no visible plates, and although she never saw who was inside, she felt as if someone was watching her. Fear began to settle in our home, like an unwanted guest. That was when my sister received a new revelation that changed everything. She had been checking her husband's bank accounts for any unusual transactions and found something chilling. For years, he had been paying for a cloud storage service. At first, my sister thought it might be work-related, but when she managed to access it, she discovered something far worse than we had imagined. There were hundreds of photos of my wife, not just the images she had found on his computer before, but many more. Some taken with a zoom from a distance, captured without her knowledge. Photos of her at the supermarket, at the gym, even images of our house, as if he had been lurking nearby without us realizing. There were folders organized by dates, with notes next to some images. Comments about how she looked that day, what she was wearing, what he imagined she was thinking. It was disturbing on a level we had never contemplated. This was no longer just an inappropriate confession or unrequited love. This was stalking in its most chilling form. My sister immediately called us, her voice trembling with anger and disgust. "This is not just an obsession," she said, trying to control her crying. "This is sick." We didn't know what to do. We called the police and handed over everything. We wanted to make sure that this man could never get close to any of us again. With the new evidence, the restraining order was approved quickly, and a judge ruled that my brother-in-law was forbidden from approaching my wife, me, or my sister and her children. But the question still hung in the air. Would this stop him? After obtaining the restraining order, we believed that my brother-in-law would finally leave us in peace. But we were wrong. Fear had already taken root in our daily lives, and every little detail made us suspect that he was still nearby. My wife was in a constant state of alert. She had changed her routine, avoided going out alone, and always checked twice before entering or leaving anywhere. Yet the feeling of being watched never disappeared. About a week after the restraining order was filed, my sister received a notification in her email. It was a message from an anonymous address with no name, no signature. It simply read, "You can't keep me away forever." She knows there's something between us. She knows, even if she pretends not to. When my sister forwarded the email to us, my wife felt a knot in her stomach. There was no doubt. It was him. Despite the restraining order, despite the law forcing him to stay away, he still found ways to make us feel his presence. My sister called the police with the new evidence, but the response was disheartening. The email did not have enough direct proof that it was him who sent it. Although everything indicated that it was, legally they couldn't do much without more conclusive evidence. My wife and I decided that it was time to take further measures. We bought security cameras for the house and changed all the locks. We even installed an alarm with motion sensors to make sure that no one could approach without us knowing. The atmosphere at home became tense. We slept poorly, constantly fearing that at any moment my brother-in-law might try something more. And then the worst happened. One night, around 1 a.m, the alarm went off. The piercing sound woke us up immediately. I jumped out of bed, running toward the door while my wife grabbed her phone to call the police. I checked the security cameras on my cell phone and saw a figure at the entrance. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, who appeared to be trying to manipulate the lock. The image wasn't clear enough to see his face, but deep down, I knew it was him. I went out onto the porch with a baseball bat in my hand and shouted, "Get away from my house! We've already called the police." The man ran toward a car parked further down the street and sped away. When the officers arrived, we showed them the recording, but just like with the email, they said that without a clear identification of the suspect, they couldn't do much. But the worst of all was the feeling of helplessness. We knew it was him. We knew he was stalking us. And yet, the law couldn't do anything until he did something truly serious. That night we didn't sleep. We sat in the living room, the TV on but not really watching it, waiting, listening for any strange sound. And at that moment, I realized something terrifying. My brother-in-law had no intention of stopping. For him, this wasn't over. And the worst part was that we didn't know how far he was willing to go. After the attempt to break into our house, the feeling of insecurity consumed us. My wife no longer wanted to be alone, even inside our own home. She closed all the curtains, checked every window and every door before going to bed. I couldn't relax either. I felt that at any moment my brother-in-law could appear again, trying to insert himself into our lives in some way. The next day, we decided that this could no longer continue. We went to the police station with the security camera recording and the history of anonymous emails. The officer who attended us listened intently, but his response was the same as before. "We know that everything indicates it's him, but without direct and irrefutable proof, we can do nothing more than reinforce the restraining order." "And what if he shows up again?" I asked, feeling the anger grow within me. The officer looked at me seriously. "If you find him on your property, call immediately. If he contacts you again, keep all the evidence. In the meantime, all you can do is be alert and avoid any kind of contact with him." It wasn't enough. My sister, for her part, was dealing with her own hell. After she was forced to kick him out of the house, my brother-in-law began playing the victim with everyone. He tried to manipulate his parents, mutual friends, even some of our relatives. He invented the story that my sister had kicked him out for no reason, that his marriage had deteriorated because she had neglected him. He said he was going through an emotional crisis, and that my wife had taken advantage of that to play with his feelings. It was a desperate attempt to change the narrative. But what he didn't know was that we had the proof. My sister showed our parents the messages, the emails, and the photos. There was no room for doubt. My mother burst into tears, while my father got up from the table, his face red with fury. "That bastard will never set foot in this house again," he declared. It was at that moment that we realized we had completely lost him. He was no longer part of our family. My sister proceeded with the legal process for divorce. Her lawyers were gathering all the necessary information to ensure that my brother-in-law would not have unsupervised access to his children. But he wasn't going to give up so easily. A few days passed without news from him, and for a moment, we almost thought that perhaps he had accepted his defeat. But then another letter arrived. It wasn't an email or a text message. It was a physical letter, handwritten, delivered directly to our mailbox. Just seeing it gave me chills. My wife didn't want to open it, but I knew we had to find out what it said. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope and unfolded the sheet. It was an extensive letter, full of desperate and disturbing words. It said that he didn't understand why everyone was treating him like a monster, that he had never wanted to hurt anyone. He told my wife that his love for her was pure, that he had never meant to scare her, only to show her what he felt. But the worst was at the end. "If you can't love me, then at least tell me that you hate me. But don't ignore me. I can't stand it." That was enough. We called the police and handed over the letter. This time, with all the accumulated evidence, they finally took stricter measures. My brother-in-law was arrested for violating the restraining order and for aggravated stalking. They took him away in handcuffs while he shouted that it was all a misunderstanding. But for us, there were no misunderstandings anymore. We knew the truth. Even though my brother-in-law was in custody, the damage he had caused didn't disappear overnight. My sister had to begin therapy to deal with the betrayal and fear she felt knowing that she had shared her life with someone so disturbed. My nieces and nephews still didn't fully understand what had happened, but they knew that their father no longer lived with them and that something had changed forever. My wife was also deeply affected. She felt guilty, even though she had no reason to. "Maybe I was too friendly with him," she said one night, tears in her eyes. "Maybe I gave him signals without realizing it." I took her face in my hands and looked her in the eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong," I assured her. "He was the one who created a story in his head. None of this is your fault." I knew it would take time for her to heal, and I was going to be there for her, no matter how long it took. We reinforced our security and tried to leave behind the shadow of my brother-in-law. But what we learned from this experience is that sometimes the people you think you know can hide the darkest secrets. And the most terrifying thing is that you never know when those secrets might come to light. What would you do in a situation like this? Leave us your opinion in the comments.